Hello, and welcome to another episode of The Soul of Business with Blaine Bartlett. I am your host, Blaine Bartlett. Um, my guest today, Dr. Grant Tate, who is the CEO of a company called Bridge Business Transformations. Key word there being transformations. That's what I wanted to have him on the show for. Grant has been in business, as long as I have. I got a hunch here. I was with IBM for 30 years. He's been around the world. And Bridge Business Transformations, he had originally founded it back in 1993, if I've got my numbers correct. And so the company's been around for a while. And the clients with whom he works, the focus is on, and I'm going to put this in my vernacular, just so we can kind of keep the theme steady here. But yeah, my bias is that every company's got a soul, at least when it starts out. But as the gestation period and the maturation period occurs, typically that company loses its soul, loses connection to it. And so part of what I want to look at here, and this is where the transformation piece comes in, is how do we work with companies that have lost their soul to regain their soul? How do we find out in kind of a early warning system here so that we can get in front of, are we risking losing our soul as a company? And what's the consequence of that if we're not paying attention? I mean, all of those sorts of things. And Dr. Grant Tate has got, I think, a pretty good take on what this is about. He's got a new book that's coming out, that has come out, Hands on the Shoulder, Finding Freedom in the Confluence of Love and Career. And I want to mark that out because we're going to have a conversation about that book a little bit later in the interview here. Because one of my best friends, one of my good friends, a fellow by the name of Raj Sisodia, wrote a book, not only Conscious Capitalism, but he wrote a book that preceded Conscious Capitalism that was called Firms of Endearment. Firms of Endearment. And I love that title. I love that book title. But it spoke to companies that had love as part of their the value core. And they are heads and shoulders above some of the other competition that they find themselves up against. And the reason that they're head and shoulders above is this piece around love. So all of that you have to say as a kind of a preamble here. Grant Tate, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here and love this topic. And I'm really eager to get going in this conversation because I think we have a lot to talk about.
I think we do too.
Yeah.
So I'll just jump in with both feet here. When you hear the term "the soul of business," what does that evoke for you? I mean, you've worked with a lot of firms. You've got your own firm.
Yeah. And so one of the things that quickly pops to mind, of course, is what are the values on which the company is formed? And of course, that's common these days. When we think about a strategic plan, we go back to the values. When I became a manager, as an example, the man that I reported to took me into the office and said, Grant, here are the three values. And we look to you and every other leader in the company to carry these out every day. And we don't fire a lot of people around here, but the people that get fired from management positions violate one of these, particularly respect for the individual. And then that was further perpetuated. The next thing that happens, management school, full week in there was no resort at the time, but an off-site location. And not only did they drill those things in, but here's how you implement it in terms of dealing with your employees. Furthermore, the top executives of the company came to those classes. And basically, in my interpretation now, we mean it.
Yeah.
Right. So, and then but you saw that play out in the actions of the executives and the way that they handle the questions. And any person in the company who had a concern could walk right into the CEO's office and talk about a concern. And that was called the open door. So there are a lot of policies like that, and that really perpetuated the values. And later in my career, throughout the 30 years, I believe mainly through the actions of one particular individual, started to lose those values. And I had some personal experiences with that CEO that demonstrated to me he wasn't particularly concerned about people. He was all about numbers. And that was what started to perpetuate all the top level meetings and the examples.
Yeah.
And I had a very strange case. One of the odd things about my IBM career is I had, I think, 15 executive or management jobs, and every one but two was either to start an organization or turn around an organization.
Mm-hmm.
And I was sent to turn around this big software lab. They had 900 people just turning out code every day. We were responsible for the biggest logistics system in IBM. Somebody ordered a computer, and that's how we got it all done. And that time we developed all those things ourselves. I got a call from the CEO's office, and he said, Frank Carey, the CEO, wants to come visit the site. And here's the thing he wants to talk about. 1, 2, 3, 4. I go, okay. We have a story here. We're trying to turn around the morale of the place. The story is the turnaround story. It's all about the people. So the day that Frank Carey shows up, he comes to the meeting and says, I don't want to hear that. I want to hear all about your programs. And my reaction was, what? And we had to scramble around and change our whole agenda, because basically he pulled the rug out on us. He was not interested at all in what we were doing to help the people. I never knew the motive behind that move, but I don't know whether his assistant was misled or lied or what. But it soured me on Frank Carey as a CEO, and said, whoa, wait a minute. We're putting all of our effort in this turnaround job, and he's not interested in that. He wants to hear what about the software we're developing. Then later we were told to not tell the truth to the people. I said, no way. My people are going to get the straight scoop. And that's, I don't know what you're doing up there in HR, but this is not right. And there were lots of other little ways, but I think another factor, of course, was that while Frank Carey was doing this, there was a suit from the Justice Department that affected how things were done in the company. And I think that it lost a lot of its verve as a result of that.
Yeah. Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry. Yeah, this is.
And how did it affect all of the people? Then the thing that held us all together with these core values really deteriorated, and people were saying, well, where are we going? What's really important? And it was a sad time for the company.
Yeah, and I love those two questions. Where are we going, and what's really important?
Right.
And the fundamental shift from what's really important are the values.
Right.
How we actually comport ourselves. When that begins to disappear, then it's an open season.
That's right. And I was sent to this software lab to fix it, essentially on a contract from the division manager that he said, we'll appoint you head of it, go out there and do an analysis to find out what we need to do to fix it, and come back and tell me. And I came back with my charts, and it said, here's what I found out after interviewing everybody and looking at all the data, and here's what I'm going to do about it. Here are the steps. And he said, how long is it going to take? And I said, 2 years. And he said, keep those charts. And all those indicators were, yes, there were budget targets. yes, but primarily, how are we going to deal with the people, the morale indicators, all of those things? It was a turnaround job, pure and simple.
Yeah.
And so that was the score on my performance was based on my ability to take a piece of the organization that had lost its soul, didn't know where it was going or what its mission was really, disillusioned people, and point them in a new revised direction.
You know, what I, and I use the word love here very, very cautiously, because this is, yeah, an all too common story in businesses. And in my experience, the toxicity of most organizations is evidenced in what it is that what you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
It's the focus, energy follows attention. Yeah, it truly does. So if the attention is not on the people, it's on the numbers, it's on productivity, the cogs in the wheel, and they are treated as such, become superfluous and replaceable. And all of a sudden you've got some toxicity, and then Gallup starts to measure disengagement numbers. Yeah. And all of a sudden it's 87%, and it doesn't, and that number doesn't change for 20 some odd years. People are disengaged, emotionally disengaged from work. And you can't wonder why. The why is answered just in the description of what you're describing, presenting here. It's easy to lose that connection. I mean, I remember, honestly, Grant, when I was working with Nokia, I worked with Nokia as an external consultant for about 12 years, and ran a major portion of their leadership development group. And I remember very distinctly when I first started working with them, they had 4 core values. Respect for the individual was one of them. But every single meeting that I was ever in that 12-year tenure with Nokia, in some way, shape, or form, those four values were touched on. If a decision was being made, it was referenced through the lens of one of those values, or all of those values, if appropriate. And there were, Jorma Ollila, who was the chairman or the CEO at the time, moved up to the chairman's position, but they brought in a new CEO. And all of a sudden things got different. The conversation wasn't about values any longer. And as a consequence of that, I mean, you fast forward and the house burned down, and it wasn't what it was. It wasn't what it could have been.
Yeah, I lost you for a few seconds there.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
But I think you probably got the gist of the idea here. I
Sure,
mean,
right. Well, I think another thing that's important is that sort of reinforcement, but also demonstration. And I had an example. I was working with a healthcare organization for senior living, and working with the head of that operation. And somehow the topic came up that a client had fallen out of the bed in one of the units. And I said, well, what are you doing about it? And he said, what do you mean? We only have, we have only 7.9 events like that a year, and the national average is 12. I don't know what the numbers were exactly, but you get the gist.
Yeah.
And then I said, did you go down and talk to the person? See how that person is? How he felt after that? Or how did the nurses react? He said, well, the statistics are okay. And so, but that lack of empathy is a key that something's not right.
Yep. Yeah. When we think about compassion cannot be present in a business environment or any environment unless the experience of connection is there.
Right.
If I don't feel connected to the people, then it becomes this stark, sterile exercise.
Right.
Yeah. So, we've talked about, the migration of loss, disconnection. Two things that I want to be sure that we touch on here is, how do we regain it once it's been lost? We notice that it's been lost. How do we regain that? And so, your turnaround story may be part of that, and I got a hunch it probably is. But also, there's some some data. There's a couple of models that speak to the nature of soul, and it gives us some guide, basically a roadmap when we're looking at intrinsic, extrinsic, and systemic, dynamics
Mhm.
that the soul actually exhibits that we can pay attention to as leaders. So before we jump into that, I am going to take a very quick break,
Okay, good.
and we will come back and talking with Grant Tate right now, Dr. Grant Tate, Bridge Business Transformations. He's the CEO there, and he does some phenomenal work in actually transforming the way that businesses function. And it's all organized around strong relationships and in curating. And I use the word curating
Mhm.
very specifically here, curating relationships. The business case for doing so is profound. So we'll be right back, folks. I want to thank you for listening. I want to also invite you right now to go to blainebartlett.com. And on that site, which is my personal website, you'll see services up on the top menu. I'd like you to click on Leadership Mastermind. Now, why I want you to do that is we have structured a mastermind program that is very unusual and it is very powerful. And by going onto that site and clicking that link, you'll be taken to a landing page that is an invitation to join this mastermind. It's a 52-week long exploration of what it takes to be a highly effective leader in today's fast-changing environment. You won't regret it. And if you've been liking what you've been listening to on these Soul of Business podcasts, how does one become a leader that can keep connection to the soul of business? That's what we look at. That's what we're about in this mastermind program. So again, go to blainebartlett.com and click on the services link. And there you'll find the link to the Leadership Mastermind program. Look forward to seeing you there. Thanks for listening to this little commercial. And now back to our show. Welcome back.
Well,
Grant, before we took that break, we were talking about how things go downhill.
right. Well, I
How do we
think
recover?
you mentioned the construct of the soul and the values and such, and the model is that I use to think about this is one developed by Robert Hartman, who was his main concern was axiology, and he developed formal axiology, which was the mathematics of values.
Right.
He said that values are constructed in a hierarchy, and he called that hierarchy, starting at the bottom, systemic, which is how do we define the structures and definitions and rules and for empathy and concern and compassion and those sort of infinite elements. So if we look at an organization, a good example, I think, is DEI programs today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so, step one is, well, we're going to have the right kind of policies. That's a systemic value. Set the policies in place, the ground rules people are going to use. Extrinsic would be, how do we have teams work together so that they can be equal and help each other? And how do we develop the skills in everybody? So regardless of race or creed or whatever, they have equal opportunities and such. And then the highest value is, how do we care about each other? How do we create the empathy and concern and the lack of bias? That, of course, is the hardest one for us to develop. How do you change somebody who has no empathy? Is one of the things we people in coaching
Mm-hmm.
work on all the time. Can I really lift that element of empathy? The answer to that, by the way, is yes.
Yes.
We can.
We can.
Takes a while. And of course, as the old joke says, how many psychiatrists does it take to change a light bulb? The answer is only one if the bulb wants to change.
Mm-hmm.
If someone recognizes that they are emphasizing too many other things other than their concern for other people or their empathy, and they really want to change the way that they behave and their habits, then with good practice and coaching, they can change that.
Yeah. And I like that framing. This is, for me, the most effective coaches I've ever worked with, and I've had coaches all my life. I've worked with coaches. I am a coach. I mean, I see the value in it, so I have them working with me. But also from a leadership perspective, the most effective leaders I've seen have also got this same trait. Both the coaches and the leaders lead from behind. They lead from behind. And implicit in that is, first of all, the person that is being worked with sees the value in transforming and in some transformative process that will result in a different outcome, a different life, a different way of being or thinking. And if leaders can do that well, all of a sudden you have an empowered workforce. You've got folks that are emotionally engaged because there's autonomy. There's ownership of what's going on. And the same would be true in the coaching environment as well. In your work with Bridge Business, how do you bring that conversation to life?
Well, I try to use examples, and if I'm working with a person that what are the things that you can do that can transform the organization in the way that people treat each other, or the way that the organization is perceived, or the looking at those three levels, have you really thought about the top level? And that was one example where in a company, biotechnology company I was working with, their business development person was in a conversation with somebody from a big customer, they were a big corporate customer, important to the company. And the CEO walked by, and he could see that the woman who was the trying to deal with this person at the other end was having a lot of trouble, and he sort of whispered, "Do you mind if I join in?" And she said, "Okay." And he picked up the phone and heard all this abuse going on, and so he stepped right into the conversation and said, "Look, we're working hard to serve you well, and we will not tolerate this kind of abuse." And there was a little more of the conversation than that, but essentially that was the essence of it. It took about, I think, 20 seconds for that situation to get around the company. I don't know about that customer's company, but certainly and so this said the CEO cares about us. He protects us from abuse, and he knows it's not just words he's saying. And so the idea of management by walking around, by expressing concern, showing up when you need to, is really important.
Chris Argyris out of Harvard, this is going to reference this in terms of values, espouse values and values in action.
Right.
And what you're speaking to there is values in action. Every company I've ever worked with in some way, shape, or form has got a values statement. And it's usually artwork that's hanging up on the wall someplace, or it's
right.
embossed on a business card. Here's our values, and people are sitting on it or looking at it, but it's not alive. And to the degree that the espoused values don't match the values in action, you've got a problem. And I think Enron is probably one of the greatest examples of that I can think of.
Okay, I lost you again for a few minutes there.
Our connection. Okay, well, I was just talking, the distinction between espoused and values in action, and I think poster child for that mismatch would have been Enron.
Oh yes. Oh yeah.
We go back into that because their espoused values were pretty dramatic. I mean, they were solid. It's kind of like, who could argue with this?
Right.
But you look at what actually happened, and
well, you mentioned symbols on the wall, but one of the things I was always fascinated by with turnaround work is how symbols count.
Yes.
What is the art on the wall? How can you use art to demonstrate that we're different now?
Yeah.
How can you use music? What those all those elements? And we actually that's one of my colleagues and I have used painting. How paint ask people individually, paint a picture of this organization and put yourself in it, and it's amazing what that sometimes shows. And
Yeah.
then we have them do a huge group painting with a team. Let's paint a vision of the future, and then let's paint the road to get there.
Yep. That reminds me of I was doing some work in a hospital system a number of years ago, and one of the members of the executive team, the chief, the CMO, the chief medical officer, was new to the position, and I remember going into her office, and she was literally new in the position. She'd never been a CMO before, and in the office as you walked in, and her administrative assistant was sitting on the left-hand side as I walked in the door, and just as I walk in the door, there's a wall in front of me. On this wall is this poster, and I can't remember exactly what it was, but I can remember the gist of it, and it was kind of like the old Pogo cartoon. I've met the enemy, and the enemy is us.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Right.
that's
Yeah.
sort of the thing. Yeah. So this is the first thing I encounter when I walk in, and the enemy is us. And it's kind of like, well, this sucks.
Right. Yeah.
So I took her aside and I said, tell me, help me understand. She says, well, I like it. I'm going, but there's a messaging in place here that you may want to pay attention to. The next day it was gone, and there was something fairly neutral in place, but she ended up putting a different poster in place that was a little bit more uplifting. But it was fascinating, and that was part of a turnaround project that we were.
Yeah. Well, one of the things, and this is an active conversation among my colleagues about coaching, how important diagnosis is to the process.
Yep.
And I've become suspicious of organizations who say, here's our process, we'll certify you in this, and everybody needs this. That's not been my experience. We use a variety of assessments, personal assessments that gives us some data plus interviews and hearing stories. And that process may go on for quite a few sessions before we really decide what does the program look like.
Yeah.
So understanding where you are is fundamental.
Absolutely. And you had mentioned that turnaround that you were doing in the lab at IBM, and your initial assessment was it's going to take at least 2 years to do this.
Right.
And that flies in the face of most management's expectations about let's get it done yesterday.
Yeah.
So that diagnostic process, and I've been curious because I've run into this myself. This hospital system I was talking about. When we went to them and said, here's what we plan on doing, what we think we can do, and this is the end result out of this. His question was, how much is it going to cost, and how much is it, how long is it going to take? My answer was, it's going to cost you more than you want to pay, and it's going to take you at least 3 years to do this.
Yeah,
and
right.
He gulped, and to his credit, he said, okay. And then he had to go convince his board that was going to be something that could be done. The question here, in part, has to do with how do you handle that temporal, that time structure, because diagnosis does take time, and I can't get to where I'm going unless I know where I'm starting. So there's an importance and a criticality to that diagnostic that is difficult for a lot of managers to swallow.
Well, if it's an organization, you can describe the diagnostic process, and even to the point of how long it's going to take, how many interviews you need to do, all the elements of that process. Look at and got all that together, and then how long does it take me to develop the plan? How do I say the priorities? Yeah. And of course, one of the things we look at when you do that is here are all the things we have to do, and here we can put those in priorities. But where are the things we can get the most impact for the quickest time?
Yes.
Because not just the managers, but also the people who have great anxiety about this new leader who's come in, this new team, then we have to help them understand we're going in new direction. We don't quite know all the details of what that looks like yet, but here's the criteria for that new direction. Back to the values. Take care
Back
of
to
the
the values
people.
of it.
We're going to be
Yep.
concerned about you. We're going to keep you informed. And then, so I hired a project leader for this turnaround, and that was the person who helped me follow the details. And we said, here are the measurements, and we gave a report on that set of measurements every month that says, here's the progress we're making.
Yeah. Transparency in relationship to the values. How are
Right.
we doing? Not what are we doing, but how are we doing? The what will always be obvious, but the
That's
how are
right.
we doing it is key here.
Yeah.
Grant, where can people find out more about what you're up to?
So the handontheshoulder.com is the website for the book and me. We have some description of the coaching process there. We're expanding that. All the contact information is right there. I am on LinkedIn as well, which is probably the best case to find out all the other details of what I'm up to. and we welcome conversations. So if someone just has a need and wants to chat, then look me up, shoot me an email, and I'll be happy to help.
Okay. And we'll make sure that this is in the show notes, handontheshoulder.com. And guest today has been Grant Tate, CEO of Bridge Business Transformations. And Grant, I've loved this conversation. It does my heart good to know that you're out there doing this work. It truly does. Yeah. It makes a difference.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And working with someone like you is how the job gets done.
Mutual Admiration Society. I love it.
Right.
So, folks, you've been listening to The Soul of Business with Blaine Bartlett. You can find out more about what I'm up to at blainebartlett.com. Take some time to nose around there. There's enough number of things, articles, programs, a couple of videos, that sort of thing. Links back to my YouTube channel, where there's a lot of stuff posted. So until next time, take some time to be very considerate about how you are being a center of distribution, not a center of accumulation. And you will find that your life works a whole lot better when you're in that position. Take care, and we'll see you on the next episode.